if Kusakabe had been the one to wield the executioner's sword? Let's talk about that and a few other manga spoiler questions from you guys. And let's just get straight into it with this question from Capital on do I think things would have played out better if they had given the executioner's sword to Kusakabe? So, no, I don't, but here's what I'll say. With any type of what if hypothetical, we could throw this in here, that in there. You could do it infinite variations, right? So in terms of switching something out like that, we got to think of the butterfly effect. If it had been always the plan to give Kusakabe the sword, there probably wouldn't have ever been a situation like we saw with Kusakabe in the Simple Domain where he was slicing up Sukuna, right? If you just somehow magically put the executioner's sword in Kusakabe's hands in that moment with everything else the same, then sure, he would have taken out Sukuna right there, right? But if the plan had been to give him the sword, which Sukuna is familiar with, by the way, since he was, in Yuji's body, but also was right there when he got sentenced. Like, he knew that sword was coming out and he was ready for it. So he would know what the sword is as well if it were hypothetically in Kusakabe's hands, and I think he would have been way more on guard. That's not to say that that moment with Kusakabe didn't surprise Sukuna. It did, but he wasn't really taking Kusakabe seriously. If you put a one-hit KO weapon in his hand, he's going to, and I don't think he gets hit by that Simple Domain like we saw him get hit by it. So no, I don't think things would have played out differently. Higuruma is built different. I mean, you saw him slicing that thing, right? It's not necessarily the same as like the guaranteed hit from Kusakabe's Simple Domain, sort of, but I do think Higuruma is much faster than Kusakabe. I think the sword was best suited in his hands. So no, I don't think there would have been a meaningful difference. But again, if you somehow just magically place it in his hands at that one moment, then sure, he would have gotten him. Next up, we've gotten a couple questions about Yuji. These are in response to my recent video about Yuji, so check that out if you're looking for the full context. But this first one from Specta here is, could Yuji's Domain sure hit effect be the soul swap? So here's what I'll say. We don't know what that is still, right? And I don't think it's a curse technique, but it could be. So if it was a curse technique, then yes, he could, imbue that into the domain, and that could be the sure hit effect. Now, how that would work? Great question. I would assume it would be some sort of soul manipulation, not necessarily like idol transfiguration, but like he would be in command of souls and could swap them and who knows what else, especially if he can interface with the innate domain specifically, right? So could it be that? If it's a curse technique, yes. Next up, we got this question from Wyatt on if Yuji's awakening does lead to him getting a domain expansion, could it possibly be unbreakable? Citing the fact that in chapter 248, Sukuna says that Yuji has an unbreakable spirit. So for my money, no, just because there's nothing in the established rules of domains that like attributes strength of spirit to like strength of a domain's barrier. However, I will say that like that could mean that Yuji's domain will be that much stronger in general, right? The stronger his spirit, the stronger his will, probably equates to like the more refined domain, just in terms of like having the motivation and the work ethic to like actually work on that, if that makes sense. So in a way, I think it could attribute to like the strength of one's domain, but again, not literally in the sense that it would be unbreakable just due to the fact that he has such a robust spirit, if that makes sense. An interesting thought though is that, Sukuna compares the strength of Yuji's will and spirit to his own, right? So if Yuji's was unbreakable, then that should mean Sukuna's was unbreakable, but we know it's not. But an interesting way to kind of look at this, which I don't think it's what you meant, but Sukuna's open domain, in a way, is unbreakable, right? Because you can't destroy the outside barrier in the same way you can with a closed domain. So if Yuji opened an open domain in that same way, then sort of it's unbreakable, right? But we know it can still collapse due to what happened in the Gojo Sukuna fight. It's just kind of breakable in a different way. And then finally, we got this question from A on what's rarer, doing soul damage without the use of a curse technique or curse tool, or learning reverse curse technique. So in my opinion, it's the soul damage with no question really, just because the conditions you need to unlock that ability, if we can call it that, is so extremely rare, right? You have to have a situation where there are two souls in one body. Does it happen? Sure, but the instances of that happening are far more rare than the instances of sorcerers. And yes, not every sorcerer can learn reverse curse technique. In fact, a very small percentage do. But every sorcerer is at least capable of learning reverse curse technique, right? There's a much wider pool of applicants, if you will. So the fact that the conditions are just so weird to learn soul perception, I would think that's more rare. Now, could there be other ways to unlock soul damage? Sure, I bet there are, in fact, but especially if we're going to get rid of curse techniques and curse tools, then I still think it's just far more rare than reverse curse technique. That's going to do it for this one, y'all. Special shout out to everybody who sent in a question, and thank you so much for watching.